What's going on, guys? BVS here from the Philippines, and I have a lot I want to talk about. I don't think I've done a sit-down talk video in so long that I feel like I kind of just need to say hi and sit down and talk about life and photography and, growth in general. Specifically, I want to talk about the things I learned leading my photography workshop in Iceland. And you guys might think, oh, it's a photography workshop. You're the leader. You shouldn't be learning, you should be teaching. But the reality is, I think that in any capacity as an educator, you're learning on a daily basis. You're learning so much. You're learning not only how to teach, you're learning how people respond to certain types of teaching. You learn how you want to teach, how you want to educate. In fact, I think teaching is such an important component to learning. In fact, it's one of the things I preach on all of my workshops is that, yes, you're here to learn, but the way you can really grow is by helping your fellow participants. Because by teaching, it reinforces the things that you've learned and the things you know. So I want to talk about the things I learned on the photography workshop in Iceland. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, the podcast is coming back. You can see the podcast mic is here, and I will be doing podcasts really shortly. I just need help. I'm super busy, and I don't really have the time it needs to constantly be cutting podcasts, so I am hiring help to help me with that. So podcast is coming back. The other thing is that I'm here in the Philippines. We're here in the Philippines. It's amazing, as usual in the Philippines. There's a lot of really cool Philippines content coming up. There's been a lot of landscape photography on the channel recently. There still will be landscape photography in the Philippines as well, but there's also going to be some street photography, maybe some portraits, some more typical travel, some urban architecture. There's going to be a bit more of a mix here in the Philippines, which I'm really excited about. So be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, because there's tons of fun stuff coming up. I should also mention, though, that the uploads might be a little bit sporadic because the Philippines, well, it's incredible in 100,000 different things. It's not incredible at internet. In fact, the internet here is so unreliable. It's terrible. Don't be surprised if there's like days that I miss. Now, I guess let's get into the video. Let's get into the discussion about Iceland and about the Iceland photography workshop, because I do think that there was a lot of things I learned on this trip. I kind of broke them down into two categories: things I learned about photography and things I learned about teaching. Let's start with the photography side of things. First, Iceland is way harder to photograph than people think. I think everybody kind of gets unrealistic expectations of what Iceland's gonna give them in terms of photos. But the reality is you do fight a lot. You fight with weather, you fight with light, you fight with the crowds that are constantly at these locations these days. And you're also constantly fighting the fact that a lot of the nature in Iceland is really delicate, so you really have to tread lightly. It makes it kind of hard to photograph. But that being said, it's such a beautiful country and maybe the most photogenic in the world that you can still get really good photos. I just think I really learned on this trip that Iceland's not like a chew-in, if that makes sense. A lot of photographers just go to Iceland because they're like, that looks like it's going to be easy to photograph, but it's not. You have to battle, and you can get really lucky like my group did and just constantly get light and not bad weather, or you can have weeks of really bad weather. So I think if you're traveling to Iceland, just be prepared for the fact that it's not going to be as easy as you might think it is. The second thing I learned is that Iceland is becoming harder and harder to be a unique photographer. Yes, it's partly because we've shot it to death as photographers. We've shot every single angle, but also because, well, we've done a lot of damage. Both photographers and tourists in Iceland have trampled it, honestly. And I'm not without blame. I've jumped barriers in the past. I've gone off the trail in the past. I've shot photos from places I probably shouldn't have gone. I haven't always been the best example, and I apologize for my actions when I have done that. It's not cool. But photographers really we're to blame in a lot of these cases. We feel like we're exempt from a lot of the rules and that we can go off trails and photograph next to rivers and on mosses just to get cool photos. But the result of kind of this damage that's happened around a lot of these locations is that Iceland's closing up a lot of these places. Some of them, they're shutting down totally, like saying no visitors allowed at all. Others are putting up restrictions, so they have really restricted paths. And that's making it hard to be a unique photographer because you really have to stick to the trails and the areas you're allowed. It's just hard. But that being said, if you want to go to Iceland and make unique images, it's still possible. You just have to go off the beaten path. And now that I say that, I don't mean it like go to Kirkjufellsfoss and then go off the path. I mean like go to totally different destinations, totally different areas. Go to the West Fjords, go to the Highlands, spend time in the north. There's a lot to explore, a lot to see, and there's so many photogenic places that you don't need to stick to these typical places. And my photography workshops in the future in Iceland, I think are really going to focus on areas that aren't the typical spots in the south. I think I really want to start moving around to different parts of the country to not only encourage people to stop trampling over the same locations over and over again, but because I feel like I'm missing out on some really cool potential locations that are out there and just haven't been discovered. Or have been discovered and just really aren't talked about that much. This third thing is something I kind of learned about photography and about teaching. And this one is that people really have a hard time understanding what a good photo is. And I think a lot of that has to do with the emotional attachment you have when you take a picture. If you see something and you capture it, it's empowering, it's exciting, and you just feel like, look what I created. It's really amazing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good photo. And yes, good photo is totally subjective. What I think is a good photo, you might not think is a good photo. But there is a good photo when it comes to selling a photo or mass appeal. And part of this process of deciding if it's a good photo is simply removing yourself completely as the photographer and start imagining yourself as a person that's seeing that photo for the first time. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do, but it will make you a better photographer because you'll know what works and what looks good. It'll also make you a more profitable photographer because it's much easier to sell images that are good. There's time and time again on this workshop and in past workshops where people will like walk up to me and show a photo that they love. And I'll be like, yeah, it's a good photo, but is it great? And then I'll kind of click through some of their other images and I'll be like, what about this one? This is phenomenal. And they'll be like, I didn't really think about it. But the reality is I think that phenomenal photo, they just don't have an emotional connection to, so they don't see how great it is. The fourth thing I learned is that I kind of want to get back to a little bit more travel. And I don't mean travel in terms of like I need to be running around the world more. I mean, I want my images to have more of a focus on travel again. I think I kind of got away from the travel angle for a while there and really started focusing on capturing landscape photography and fine art. And yes, you can infuse travel into fine art and landscape photography, but I really love the travel angle. I think the travel angle inspires people, it motivates people, and it instills in them this idea that I want to go there, I want to do these things. I think it gets them off their couch. And that's why I do this. I want people to go out and discover the world. So I want to get back to the travel angle, and I kind of learned that on this trip to Iceland. I did shoot way more travel style on this trip than I have in the past, and I had so much fun doing it. The fifth thing is that I work so much better when I revisit places. When I started photography, I almost kind of treated it like a scavenger hunt. I'd photograph a destination and then I would never return to it because I'm like, I shot that already. I already got that image. But what I realized in Iceland, and this is now my third time coming back to Iceland, and some of these locations I've now shot 6 or 7 different times, what I realized is that I'm at my absolute best when I can go to a place and then come back to it constantly. And I was worried that that wasn't going to be the case because I kept worrying that if I kept going back to the same place, I'd get bored. But I think what happens instead is you go to a place the first time, you shoot that iconic image, you get it out of your mind. Then the second time you go back, you can go and try to create something a little bit unique. Then you can separate yourself from that second experience and go, okay, I tried to do it, but what did I miss on? Then the third time you go back and you nail it. So I think that revisiting places really is so important, and I never gave it enough value. My images from Kirkjufellsfoss I think are the best I ever shot. My images from Diamond Beach, they're kind of on that second visit stage. I think I can refine them and make them perfect, but I feel like revisiting places is something I used to be scared of, whereas now I'm absolutely loving revisiting places. Now, some things I learned about leading photography tours and teaching and stuff like that. The first thing that I learned, maybe reinforced, is that you can't do things. You need to lead other people to doing things. I was reading this article about a hunter, and I find hunting for sport despicable and horrible. And there was this story of this guy hunting a lion in Africa, I can't remember which country. And the guide basically set up the tripod, set up the scope, adjusted everything, tracked the animal, found everything. Then the hunter just walked up and pulled the trigger. And yes, I was disgusted by the thought of the fact that he was hunting a lion. But what I kept thinking is, how can you feel any satisfaction as the hunter if you didn't do any of the work? If you didn't have any of the expertise, if you couldn't do it on your own? And if you got in a situation where you needed to hunt something, could you do it on your own? Another example is I used to drive tour buses in university, and there was like this instructor who would sit over your shoulder and he'd go left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn. And we had these routes that we had to follow, and they were guiding us through them. And I remember the first day I drove without an instructor, I had to get to this hotel, and I must have done that drive 300 times. And I almost got lost on the way there because I was used to having somebody over my shoulder telling me exactly what to do. You don't really learn unless you do it for yourself, unless you physically do it for yourself. And I've found that the more I lead photography tours, the more hands-off I become. And the more hands-off I become, the more people learn. I've seen photography workshops where the instructor just walks around to camera, changes all the settings to get them the right way, and basically even points the camera for the photographer, for the participant to shoot the button. I don't work that way. Because I want people to not only be able to take photos on my workshops, I want them to be able to take photos when I'm nowhere around, when there's no YouTube, when there's no instruction manual. I want them to be able to take pictures wherever they want. The goal of maybe other photography workshops is to get clients to keep coming back to their workshops. The goal of my photography workshops is to get people to the point that they never need another photography workshop ever again. The next thing I learned is that leading is about empowerment and honesty. I grew up playing sports, and a lot of, playing ice hockey in Canada or any really team sport back home is about negative reinforcement. If you do something wrong, your coach just bench you. There's a lot of negative attached to teaching and leading back home and maybe just everywhere in sports, and you can't do that when leading a photography tour. You really just need to empower people. When I was leading this photo clinic in Greece a couple months ago, I asked the class, who feels empowered when they take photos? And everybody put up their hands. It is so empowering, photography. It's so, confidence building. It's just so empowering. You just feel this sense of, I made something, I did something, I created that image, and it's really powerful. And leading people to feel that empowerment is massive. It is such an important thing to empower people. I think that great teachers aren't really so much instructors as they are people that empower. I also learned that honesty is so important as a leader. You can't be negative, and you can't even constructively criticize. What you need to do is you need to find ways to guide people to criticizing their own work in a constructive manner. You need to find a way to be honest about people's work by not actually saying things, but guiding them to that reality. And that's such a challenge, and it's something that I've found quite difficult, but I feel like I'm getting better at with more trips. The other thing I've learned on this trip is that there's so many good photographers out there. I've said this from the beginning. I'm average. I'm an average person, averagely talented. I'm average in every single way. And I've accepted that. I like the idea that I'm this average person that goes out and lives an extraordinary life. And I like the fact that maybe I can inspire other people who feel like they're average or whatever to go out and lead exciting lives and go out and see the world. But I always feel average when I'm leading these trips, because I see the talent of people that are coming on these trips and thinking just, wow, there's so many good photographers. And if these photographers had the opportunities that I have to go out and shoot every single day, they would be at the same level as I am. This workshop and every workshop that we've done, at the end we always do a photo showcase of everybody's best 3 images, and every single time there's at least 3 or 4 images in that batch that I go, wow, I wish I took that. And this group was no different. There's so many talented photographers out there. And I think that's part of the lesson to you guys is don't take that as like a, oh, there's so many photographers out there, what's the point of even trying? Take that as a, there's so many photographers out there, I just need to work harder. And that's what I did. I'm not special in any sort of way, I just worked hard. So work hard if you want it. Final thing I learned on this workshop in Iceland is that I think that there's 2 types of photographer. I don't know what class I would call these. I'm not calling them beginners or intermediate or advanced, just photographers in general. I think there's 2 types. Those who move way too much and those who don't move enough. And this group we had, this group of participants was almost split down the middle in both of those categories. There were certain people that would find a photo, they would literally get out the van, walk to what was obviously a really good photo, they'd walk to that spot and they would sit on it for like 20, 30, 45 minutes, even an hour just sitting on the same shot, making little tiny differences in their shots and in their composition. And the advice I always gave to them was, if you love the photo, sure, stay with it, make sure you get it right. But if you're like, it's a good photo, take it and move. You have to keep moving, keep moving. And then there was the other side of the coin. The people that were just shooting everything. There's always a couple people in every group that photograph like it's a sport, like it's their goal to try to capture as many different photos as possible on the trip. And that's fine. There's no right or wrong way to do photography. If you're loving what you're doing, do it. But on both sides of this coin, there is the issue that when you get home, you might have a little bit of regret. If you're sticking on one photo for way too long, you might get to the end of the day and see other people's photos and go, why didn't I shoot that? Or on the other side of the coin, if you're racing around, you might photograph every single possible angle, but you might get home and see that one really great photo and think, oh wow, I messed that little tiny thing up because I was rushing. So if you're the type of person that runs around snapping photos like crazy, and that was definitely me early in my career, if you're one of those people, slow down. My advice to those people was always take twice as much time making a photo as you have been, and you'll just get way, way better photos doing that. I think that's it from the Iceland content. I want to say a massive thanks again to Greg, to Ivan, to Jody for all the help on the trip. Massive thanks to all the participants. You guys were all very talented. There's some of you that have the potential to be pros for sure. And it was just an awesome group of human beings above all else. There is going to be at least one more Iceland photography workshop announcement coming at the end of this month. And I'm hoping it'll be the end of the month. It might be the start of February, but there's some announcements coming regarding more trips, and I'm really looking forward to them. And yeah, I think that's it for this video. Stay tuned, because tomorrow, or on tomorrow's video, we're flying here to the Philippines, and it's an exciting trip. More on that tomorrow. I'll see you there. Peace.